So, the novelist I'm going to talk about right now is. He's very. He's. Well, he's well known amongst the type of stuff he writes about, and he's lauded as a great voice in literature. And he. I'll say this. I have more respect for him than enjoyment that comes from reading his work. I'm, of course, talking about James Michener. And this particular novel I'm going to be talking about is his novel, Carribean. I'll just be straightforward. I could not finish this. I tried so hard. I tried so hard to finish this, and I couldn't. It's long. It's boring. It's so boring. And the thing is, I don't mind historical fiction, and that's what James Michener wrote. Almost everything he wrote was historical fiction. All of his novels, or most of them anyway, were long, sweeping epics of a certain place in the history from basically the dawn of time to modern times. With fictitious characters in the backdrop of all this. And that's fun. I don't mind it. I like historical fiction. There are historical writers I enjoy. I just don't like him. And my reason for it is Michener didn't write novels, he wrote textbooks. And when I'm reading one of his novels, I'm not reading a story of characters, of different generations of people. I'm reading a textbook. And all of his novels, I've tried to read a few. They're textbooks. He wrote textbooks in the guise of fiction. I don't know why he just didn't write nonfiction accounts of these places. That would have been more... Actually, I think that would have been more straightforward and more interesting because I read nonfiction history books a lot. I like history as a subject. I think it's interesting to know the history of different places around the world and where they came about and the things that happened. It's just if I'm going to read fiction, if I'm going to read a novel, I want to read a novel. And don't get me wrong, historical novels can be about characters in a time and place. And maybe even in the middle of a zeitgeist or a major occurrence in history. That's fine. But Michener basically just wanted to write a history of a place. In Carribean, for example, it talks about the very beginning of how the island formed amongst people in the Dominican Republic all the way through when the Spaniards came and Columbus and the fight for power over the land and all those things, yada, yada, yada. But rather than telling a story, he's basically just writing a textbook from a character's point of view. It's not the same thing as, say, a Western. For example, Louis L'Amour wrote stories that were set in a time and place in history. And they were stories. They were fictitious characters and fictitious narratives that happened to be in real time in a real place. And sometimes he even wrote stories that happened in real events. Lois Lowry wrote Number of the Stars. Fictitious characters in a real place, in a real time, and a very dangerous time for these characters. And that novel was great. Because the difference between Lois Lowry and Louis L'Amour, or Larry McMurtry, or anyone else who writes historical fiction, is that they wrote stories in these time and places. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with writing like a multi-generational story. Like a saga set amongst like a family or something. Or, generations of a family. I mean, other novelists have done that very well. Very exceptionally well. And Michener does that. All of his characters will be like, will start like in natives and then go up to like in this the Spaniards, and I'll have characters and talk about them and their lives and where they came from, and then they'll go through history. But the difference between those guys and Michener is Michener just wanted to basically write 800-page essays on the history of a place as opposed to just telling a story. The story feels like an afterthought. That's my biggest problem, and that's what I've been trying to articulate this whole video. His stories feel like an afterthought. It feels like he just wanted to write about history, but he's like, I'll try and make this more appealing to a mass audience, so I'll try to make it fictitious slightly, but it's not fictitious. It's more just, oh, here's a random guy. But look at all the history. Look at all the history. Read about the history. Read about every minutiae little detail of the formation of this place. And that's fine. I mean, and if you're into that, that's cool. That's fine. It's just, that's not what I read novels for. I don't read novels to get an entire history of somewhere. I read books on history, non-fiction books, to get history. I've tried reading Carribean, however you say it. I've tried reading Carribean, I tried reading Chesapeake. He wrote a novel about fucking space, and that was boring. I was like, how do you make space boring? He did. I mean, if I wanted to read a history of NASA and the astronauts, I would just check out a book at the library about NASA and the astronauts. I don't need to read an 800-page book. So, I think you guys understand my point. I like history. I like reading nonfiction books on history. I don't want to read Michener. And other historical writers, like I said, they told a story first and had it set in a time and place. That is how you write historical fiction. I don't typically care for people who try to write encyclopedic novels. I mean, unless you're Thomas Pynchon, don't try to write an encyclopedic novel. I won't read it. Nobody else will either. I mean, and again, Michener is renowned and respected, and I do respect him as a novelist. I mean, I probably couldn't crank out these, books that are longer than the Bible. I probably couldn't get as many sales or recognition or respect or even be nearly as talented as a writer. He is a talented writer. But what he's writing about is just, oh, I could read this in a history book. I'm reading this novel too, because I want to find out about, I want to hear a story. A fictional story. If I wanted to read about actual history and the real story of somewhere, I would just do that. So, I think you guys see where I'm coming from. And I don't mean to slam the guy too hard. I mean, he is, on a technical level, a good prose writer. He can write readable prose. I've read much, much worse writers. I've read writers who were horrible at describing things, horrible at exposition, clumsy with dialogue, terrible at coming up with realistic characters. I've read writers that just stink. I mean, I read their stuff and I'm like, this fucking sucks. How did you get published? And with Michener, I see it. I see why people like him. I see why he became a writer. I see how his stuff got published. I see the appeal. And the cool thing about it is I can actually see an audience for his stuff. I get it. I can see someone being like, well, I don't want to read a book on the history of Texas. But I can read this novel about the history of Texas and, and learn something. And I kind of feel like that's what Michener did. He wrote novels for people who didn't technically really want to read a history book, but still wanted to know or learn something about history. And I can respect that. It's just not for me. And typically the stuff I talk about in here I usually really like, and so I typically get very positive reviews on it, or kind of just, ramble on about how great, or even just, how regularly good something is. But I don't know. I can't lie. I don't want to lie to you guys. I just don't like his stuff. Oh, if I want to read good historical writers, I'll stick to some of the aforementioned people. I'll read Lowry's Number of the Stars again. I'll read Larry McMurtry's Western fiction. I'll read Cormac McCarthy. Oh my God, is a fantastic, Western writer, and this stuff is really dark. Even Lily Moore, who's not technically the best writer and was very formulaic, I still enjoy, a really good historical novelist, and a very underrated one, actually. It was a guy named Greg Matthews, who wrote a really great novel called The Heart of the Country. And he wrote a really good novel set like in the Old West called Power in the Blood, which I may even do a review on because I really like that novel. So I mean, yeah, there are historical writers I like. I'll even read Love Comes Softly before I'll read, and I don't like